Welcome to this episode of Careers Takeoff, where we learn the very latest about how people can get ahead in their careers. I'm your host, Conrad Chua. Not many MBAs go to work in areas that inflame the passions of billions of people every week. But our two guests today, they are privileged to work in the area of sports. And that sports has that very special hold on people all over the world. We've got Andreas Kitzing, who started a company called Sponzoo, and it is a marketplace for sports sponsorships. We also have Zal Udwadia, a consultant with Deloitte Sports Group, and they do a lot of research into the economics of professional sports, including football or soccer for all those North American listeners out there. They'll talk about their careers in sports, but we've brought them here together really to talk about something very topical, and that is the European Super League fiasco. So, welcome, Zal and Andreas.
Hi, Conrad.
Great. Now, if you're watching us on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, remember, post your questions or comments for our guests, and we'll go through them. So we're going to have a very short history of the European Super League. And I say it's short because, hey, it only lasted like 3 days. Now, on 18th of April, 2021, the European Super League was announced. And what it is, we had 12 founder clubs who agreed to join as founder members, and they wanted 3 others to come in, 3 other founder clubs. And they proposed that every year, 5 other clubs would get invited to join. And that makes 20 clubs, and they'll play against each other. And it effectively would end the Champions League, which is the current model, where clubs across Europe compete in their domestic leagues, and the top clubs get to go into the Champions League. Now, the proposal met with universal condemnation from fans, players, clubs, even politicians got involved. I remember within 3 days, Boris Johnson, Emmanuel Macron came out and said they were dead set against it. I mean, these are 2 politicians who were about to send their navies out to Jersey to enforce fishing rights, and yet they found common ground on this European Super League. So it was shelved within 3 days. And we can talk a lot about what's wrong or maybe what's right about this ESL proposal. But just a reminder, if you've got any questions, comments, please put them there. Maybe if I start with you, Zal, can you just tell us a bit about what are the economics of these top football clubs?
Sure, Conrad. So if you think about the business model of football clubs, they're actually quite simple, right? You've got 3 main sources of revenue. You've got matchday revenue, which is your ticketing revenue. You've got broadcast revenue from sort of playing in the league or in European competitions, and you've got sort of commercial revenue. So the business model of football clubs is pretty simple. And over the last 20 years or so, we've seen huge growth in revenue across Europe's big 5 leagues, which is your England, Germany, Italy, Spain, and France. Exponential growth in revenue. So if you look back when the Premier League first started in around 1992, 1993, Premier League revenue at that time was around 120 million. In 2018-19, which was the last season pre-COVID, revenue crossed £5 billion for the first time, right? So revenue has grown exponentially, but what football clubs haven't been so good at is controlling their cost. You've got really high wage to revenue ratios at football club, 60, 70%, even more sometimes, which really makes operating profit challenging. Saying that, however, historically, European clubs have made huge losses, but since around 2010 or so, with the introduction of Uefa's financial fair play regulations, losses have reduced, and most big clubs do make some operating profit these days. So that's probably a little high-level summary of European football finances.
So Zal, does that, you talked about this exponential increase in revenue. So was that driven by broadcasting rights and sponsorships, or was there also stadium takes as well?
So a majority of it is entirely driven by broadcast revenue. So the growth has really tied up to exponential rights fees that broadcasters are paying to broadcast these premium sports competitions. So if you look at an average Premier League club, for example, 60% of their revenue just comes from broadcast rights. I'd say about 10 to 12% from match day rights or match day revenue, and 28% up to 30% from commercial revenue. So it's really broadcast revenue that's driven and fueled that exponential growth that we've seen in football club revenue in the recent decades.
Andreas, I'm turning to you. You've worked with sports clubs at every level. Is the economic picture for these clubs who maybe will never get an invite to the European Super League, is that the same picture for them?
It's similar, but the farther down you go in the professional level, obviously broadcasting becomes less important, because matches are sometimes even in lower leagues not streamed at all. And relatively more important are more regional sources of revenue, more fan-based direct sources. So merchandising becomes more important. Ticketing becomes more important. At the really base grassroots level, club membership fees are a big factor. So what we see is that, and these don't change that much, at least not that exponentially. What we see is that while broadcasting fees as a revenue source is taking off more and more and is growing exponentially, while the others are growing more linearly, the gap between the elite football and grassroots teams or smaller teams widens, and that's something that fans are not very happy about, and that already produces a anti-sentiment for anything that would give more money to these elite clubs.
All right, great. I see there's a question from Cornell on LinkedIn, but I think I'll go I'll show it first, but we'll get to it later, because I think we need to establish some groundwork first. So Zal, can you paint this picture of, at least at the top, they've had great increases in revenue. Yes, the wage cost is a big issue, but losses have been stemmed. So what drove owners to think about establishing this European Super League?
Sure, Conrad, that's a good question. I think there are a few things, and I think, as I mentioned earlier, sort of pretty much every year in the 21st century, pre-COVID, football club revenue has grown, right? And sports and football has traditionally been seen as quite a resilient proof industry. But of course, COVID changed everything. Even football was untouched, which could not previously be touched, was impacted by COVID. And just to put things into context, right? So when we did our football money league, our Deloitte football money league at the start of the year, which sort of profiles the highest or the 20 highest revenue generating clubs in Europe. So revenues in 19-20 compared to the previous 18-19 season declined by 1 billion euros. And that just had 3 months of COVID impact of COVID-19 on their financials, right? So just 1 quarter or so of the impact of COVID had huge decreases in revenue, right? You've got broadcasters who wanted rebates, you've got no fans at your games, and you've got sort of commercial partners, which, depending on the strength of the relationship, could either stick with you or move on. So that's the sort of context on the financial situation of these big clubs pre-COVID or during COVID. And I think part of the reason why the big clubs wanted the European Super League, part of it was a power grab, of course, but I think the key word here is consistent and predictable sources of revenue. Is what they look for. In a league where you said the 15 or 12 or 15 founding clubs were fixed and would participate in that competition every year, from the creators of this competition, it almost felt that they were guaranteeing them significantly more revenue than they were currently achieving with playing in the Champions League, or obviously not playing in the Champions League in some seasons. So the predictability of revenue and the consistency of revenue was a big thing. And of course, that was all exacerbated by COVID, right? The concept of the European Super League has been around for several decades, right? It tends to come up typically every time UEFA's broadcast rights cycle are up for negotiation. So there's this real correlation between when UEFA's rights cycles end and when you start hearing in the press the murmurs about the Super League. And our opinion has been sort of for years that it's too difficult to implement, it'll never happen. And of course, you're only right until you're proven wrong. And, we were almost proven wrong 2 or 3 weeks ago. But I think the episode just shows how difficult it is to create such a breakaway league. And, I've never seen football come together so united before.
Yeah. Andreas, I've noticed on LinkedIn you've written a lot about the European Super League and about the fans and why they're angry. Can you tell us, why were fans so angry about this proposal? Even fans from the 15 or 12 founder clubs were angry about it. Why?
Yeah, I think what the founders of the Super League missed is that the way football is structured in Europe at the moment is really a cultural thing. Fan culture, competition culture. It's culture here. And the way they would set it up in a way that would guarantee clubs to participate in this league, no matter how successful they play, so they effectively couldn't be relegated. It's against everything that European football stands for and has been standing for more than 100 years. That's one thing. Then the other thing is that national leagues are really important in Europe. The Premier League is important. It's important who wins the title in the Premier League. It's important who wins the title in the Bundesliga. Well, it used to be. Nowadays, it's just Bayern Munich, but maybe that will change at some point in the future. So, and if you take out the top clubs in these leagues, the national leagues are not important anymore. And that's something that fans feel really passionate about and don't want to see that go away. And I think
but Andreas, I'm gonna
wait a second. I often heard the argument, yeah, but Bayern Munich wins every year anyway, and Juventus wins every year anyway. Well, not this year, but so if you take out the top clubs, these leagues become more competitive, so more interesting. But that's the wrong way to think about it. If Bayern Munich wins every year, you shouldn't take out Bayern Munich. You should ensure that the other clubs can compete and that there's an athletic competition. And yeah, fans get that instinctively and are really emotional about this topic. And I really don't know what went wrong there in the initial assessment if the Super League would have potential or not. But at that level of professionalism, you should have been aware of the reactions beforehand.
Yeah, I was going to say that actually, I think in the proposal, the teams in the Super League would still play in the domestic leagues, but obviously, the Champions League in its existing concept would be gone, and any other club will find it almost impossible to get in. I just want to show some comments. So I think we've got Maimun, thanks very much, who's against this European Super League. He says no promotion and relegation means richer clubs will get richer. And the charm of seeing a success story of a smaller club doing well would be lost. And that's the beauty of football. So that's Maimun's comment. And maybe this is a good time to take Priyan's question, which is, he says, clearly the events of the Super League proposal rightly irked fans globally. How could these huge businesses clearly not understand or see the power or opinions their direct customers have? So which one of you want to take this part about basically owners not misjudging the public climate?
Maybe I can start, and Sal, you can add to that. So I mean, the thing is that most of these club owners are not sitting here in Europe. Well, take away maybe Perez not as an owner, but as a president. But in Spain, the sentiment against the Super League was not as strong as in all the other European markets. And I mean, clearly you see, and you have seen that in the park. Just look at the history of the Glazers and the Manchester United fans, that the connection between club owners and fans here in Europe is not that strong. And as people who sit somewhere around the globe and are not really rooted in these European football culture system, they don't 100% get how it works, and they didn't manage to get that after several years. And what I think is that they are more looking at the global audience and deliberately looked at the global audience and think, hey, a global audience doesn't know smaller clubs, and they're not interested in matches where Manchester United plays against some lesser known club, and they just want these super matches against the 10, 20 brands that they actually know about. And well, yeah, maybe the local fans won't like it so much, but it will increase our global appeal. So I think that at least to some degree, it was a bet to increase the attractiveness of their products for a global audience at the expense of what local audiences want. And they clearly underestimated the level of backlash it would get, and also what that would mean globally, because local fans do have an influence about the global perception of brands like Manchester United or Real Madrid or Juventus Turin.
Yeah, I was going to turn to Zal here because Andreas, you mentioned about these US-based owners, and obviously they're very used to a certain way of owning not a club like a football club, but a franchise. So Zal, very briefly, you talked about the economics of professional football, but what's the economics of owning a franchise in professional sports in the US? How different is that?
Yeah, so Conrad, I think the first thing to recognize is the sports model in America is completely different. The big 5 sports leagues there are all franchise models, which are essentially closed shop leagues. Interestingly, though, a closed shop league tends to mean more equal revenue distribution, which is quite ironical. But if you look at sort of some of the big owners of the European football clubs, where you've got John Henry at Liverpool, he owns a baseball team, for example. The Glazers at Manchester United own an NFL team. Kroenke at Arsenal owns an NFL team, an NBA team, and an NHL team. You've got American owners at AC Milan. So the sports model they've grown up on, and they've recognized, and the sports model in which they own franchises across the pond is all closed leagues with really traditional, with really predictable sources of revenue. And essentially what they felt is there's an opportunity to replicate this in Europe. The closed league franchise model in America really drives up valuations of US sports franchises. So you've got really disproportionately high franchise valuations in the US because it's a closed league and because no one can buy in, or no one can buy a lower tier team and bring them up to the top tier because they're so scarce. So that was something they thought of as well, potentially. And that all led to the discussions about the Super League and why they were in favor of it.
Yeah, and I think this is a good time to take Junpei's question, which is, so you've described what the American owners were hoping to do, driving up valuations, keeping it close like a cartel. But what do you think then football clubs can do to increase their revenues, at the same time not alienating their local fans?
So I think when I spoke about the sort of business model of football clubs, right, there's just broadcast, match day, and commercial revenue. Broadcast revenue is relatively out of your control. It can sort of fluctuate a bit based on your position in the league and your performance in European competitions. So the two real revenue streams in control that clubs are in control of are match day and commercial revenues, right? So match day revenues is all about how clubs can maximize attendance at their stadiums. And of course, there's this trade-off between sort of ticket prices and trying to increase attendance. And big increases in ticket can be controversial. So prices and match day revenue is the main source. And then commercial revenue, so I'll let him touch upon how to increase that commercial revenue.
Sorry, Zal, you're breaking up a bit. Can you just go back?
Sorry.
Can you just repeat the last maybe couple of seconds?
Sure. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, you're fine.
Great. So I said it's just match day broadcast and commercial revenue that clubs can control. And with broadcast, that only really fluctuates based on your league position. You have really little control on it. And it's just the match day and commercial elements that clubs can control. With match day, it's all about maximizing your attendance. And with commercial revenues, it's just about how innovative you can be. How do you add value to your sponsors and your partners? And Andreas can sort of just work about this because it's a field he works in.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Andreas.
I mean, that's exactly the business field I'm operating in with Sponsu. I generally agree on your assessment that these are the areas where you can influence revenues. I think that clubs should be careful not to overspin the wheel in terms of matchday revenues. So European football fans already spend quite a lot on their relationship to their clubs. I don't think there is much more additional potential to get out of these fans, and fans don't like being milked for revenues to an extreme degree. What I think that clubs should understand is, and what some clubs definitely understand, is that their fans and their love for the club is also adding to the value of their global brand. So a global football brand is attractive because, just look at Liverpool, because the fans are so passionate about the club, and you can clearly see it when you just view a match. You don't even need to be in the stadium. I mean, at the moment you don't see the fans, but usually you see them, and this is something that you can at least internationally commercialize to some degree. So fans also internationally like clubs with a good fan base and would be willing to pay for merchandise, and sponsors are willing to invest into clubs that have a strong emotional appeal to their audiences. And the thing that clubs can do is to maximize the appeal to these audiences and then to commercialize it. And maybe to differentiate a bit, that's a trend that we're seeing in sponsorship generally, that you tend to have more local deals also abroad. So a club like Manchester United could and does have some sponsors that explicitly appeal to audiences in Asia or in Africa or in Latin America, and you need to be clever with activations and with the rights that you give to the sponsor in order to address these audiences separate. But the thing is that football is already quite a mature market, so there is not that much more potential that you can get out of, at least not in Europe. I mean, global audiences are a growth potential, but at some degree you will also have reached the maximum that you can get out there.
Conrad, if you just take a step back for a second and just think of football as a product, right? It's unscripted drama that works globally. It has to be consumed live. It aggregates an otherwise sort of atomized audience. It's a product that people engage with on social media. It's a product that people have great passion and loyalty towards. It's a product that people are sort of happy to pour any amounts of data into, you know? So if you just take a step back and think about all those characteristics and you build a product around that, it would be the greatest product in the world. And yet it sort of already exists, right? And it's existed for 100 years. And that's football. So it's an incredible product.
Yeah, that's really interesting take on thinking about it that way, as like as a product that can be marketed and sold. I was gonna we've got quite a lot of questions about, let's say, the future of European football. But before we go there, I wanted to pick up this point about the atmosphere and the local fans, for example. And Andreas, you talked about how, for the match day revenue, the ticket sales, right? You've got to balance between increasing the ticket sales to maximize revenue, but then you're alienating a big segment of the population. In a way, you're in Germany, so in Germany the ticket prices have been much lower than, say, here in England, where it costs. I have to pay probably more than a family. A family could go to watch a Bundesliga game, right, for how much I have to pay as an individual. But I wonder whether, in a way, this model of maximizing every match day ticket has created a situation where, if I look around, when I go football, I look around, it's really just a very particular segment of the population that turns up to watch football nowadays. It's usually older men, and the atmosphere is very great. It's visceral, but there's also a lot of homophobic, racist, misogynistic remarks that get shouted at from terraces. There are very few women, very few families that watch a Premiership game nowadays in the terraces. How do you think football could address this or change the dynamic so that a much wider population can go and enjoy football?
Yeah, I mean, just look at Germany. Not that I want to praise the Bundesliga all over. There is lots of areas where other leagues are doing better, but getting the fans into the stadium at fair price, but still making lots of money from ticketing is something where the Bundesliga has been really good at. And one of the keys is again price differentiation. So you have season tickets who are quite heavily discounted for the really loyal fans. And actually, at most of the clubs, the owners of season tickets are even obligated to go to the stadium to a degree. So if I miss too many matches of my favorite club in Hamburg, my season ticket will be canceled for the next season, and there's a waiting list for this, so it will be difficult to get it back. So fans should really go to the stadium, and then the cheaper tickets, so more, for example, behind the goals where you don't see as great as in the sideline, they're significantly cheaper than the premium seats at the sideline. So with these more premium tickets, you still make a lot of revenue. And there's a family block in nearly every stadium where you can get discounted tickets if you go there with children, and you have an atmosphere that is exactly not as you describe. And that adds to a really rich stadium environment that I think has been a strong selling point for Bundesliga all over the world. So fans really like this, and specifically select the Bundesliga team to follow. It's definitely good for players. Players like to play in such an audience as well. And I mean, every cent that you can save on player salaries is well spent, and it just increases the value of the brand. And you might earn a little bit less than if you maximize the revenue potential from ticketing, but you get it back other ways. You get it back for more merchandising revenue, for a stronger global brand that you can commercialize globally in terms of merchandising, in terms of sponsorship. And in the end, I don't think that they make more money, but also they don't make less money, but have a better experience for everyone involved. And I think that's the way to think about it. So you should not only maximize your own revenue, you should think about all stakeholders. And coming back to the Super League, that's what the inventors of the Super League definitely missed.
I'm going to take a question here from Niladri. It's actually a thought that, so what about having a concept like a VR box? I'm not sure what a VR box is, but I guess it must be some VR goggles sort of thing to make front row experience accessible for all from the comfort of their homes. And he's also got this one where it'll be on a subscription model. So it'll be sort of good recurring match day revenue streams. Zal, do you want to take this idea?
Yeah, sure. So they are changing consumption trends, particularly sort of with younger generations, with technology coming into play and things like that. But I think what the COVID pandemic has sort of highlighted is that there's no sort of better way to consume sport other than live. You might have sort of the best technology, watching it through different mediums with different streams, but nothing beats consuming live sports. And that's what sort of makes the Super League decision even more baffling. Everything comes down to the fans. Whatever you do with football, wherever you sort of trace the revenue streams, whatever it may be, it just comes back down to the fans. And without live fans, without that atmosphere, without back stadiums, football is nothing.
Yeah, I was going to say, here in the UK, Amazon Prime sponsors several, broadcast several football matches. And one of the great things that they did was give people an option to block out the commentator. So you just hear the stadium noise. Yeah. And I love that, really. I think it's time actually to take some of the questions about, let's say, the future of football. So I'm going to go back here to Cornel Grunwald, who asked, is it the case that the Super League is cancelled now permanently? Or will it come back in another in another form? So I don't know, Andreas or Zal, do you want to take this? Who wants to take this?
So I think, yeah, I think for me, this episode has just highlighted how difficult a breakaway league is, and the need for sort of unity at top level football. And in a way, this could lead to sort of huge reforms. You know, there's government-led reviews going on in England, fan-led reviews, talk of England adopting a more German-style ownership model. So in Germany, they've got a 50+1 ownership rule, which in most cases gives fans that extra majority when it comes to club ownership. So it's a time sort of for football to come together. And I think this episode has really highlighted how difficult it is to do, and no one wants it really. I think it's shown players don't want it, fans don't want it. I think the business model is flawed to an extent. You know, they talk about sort of doubling the broadcast revenue they could generate from UEFA's compared to UEFA's Champions League, but it's again a midweek competition, which is going to be 4 a.m. in Asia, middle of the working day in America. I don't see how it sort of moves the dial significantly compared to UEFA's Champions League. So yes.
That's a really nice segue to this question from someone on LinkedIn, which is, do we think there'll be any reform from UEFA in the Champions League in response to the ESL to appeal to a more global fan base to increase revenue for participating clubs? I think UEFA has had some kind of proposal. I mean, you mentioned, Zal, that it was like the day before or day after.
Yeah. It has been approved already.
Yeah. So what is this reform proposal?
So essentially, they've expanded. Part of the reason why they did the reform was to appease some of the bigger clubs to an extent, and it did get voted through. So the new Champions League model is going to switch to 36 teams from 32. But the main difference is that it's a Swiss-style model where it's one big league and each team plays 10 league matches rather than the 6 group stage matches that they currently play. So it's giving extra European games to clubs that qualify. But I think one of the big differences is the 4 extra spaces in this new competition. 2 of them are going to be based on historic coefficient. So it's almost a backdoor route to some of the big clubs that may miss out on European qualification to come play in the Champions League. So in a way, it's a sort of less of the two evils compared to the Super League, because you're still sort of giving clubs that don't get there on merit a big chance. And sports in Europe and football is all based on meritocracy.
Yeah, and I'm curious if actually I don't think that the European Super League proposal will push the UEFA more into a similar direction. I think what we see now is that they got their reform voted through, but the fans are still there. They're still much more organized and much more united than before. And I'm really curious to see if they eventually channel their anger at the new Champions League reform, which was also universally disliked by fans all over the continent. And especially these extra seats are something that really strongly goes against every value of European football. And again, here the players don't like it, the coaches don't like it. Just look at what Jürgen Klopp said about it. The fans don't like it, and I'm curious to see if the united potential of all these actors within the system is strong enough to at least take out some components of the Champions League reform before it starts getting put into practice in 2024.
Someone on LinkedIn has even suggested, since UEFA has 3 billion euros of annual revenues, why don't we just eliminate UEFA from the equation? Is that even something that's realistic?
That's honestly difficult to do. They're the sort of continental federation of football in Europe, and every sort of club rising up the ranks dreams of qualification in the Champions League. You know, in my mind, the Super League already exists. It is the Champions League. It's a model where if you perform well, you can break into. So it's a good model. I think the last few months have sort of highlighted possible needs to change the way revenue is distributed within the sport of football, right? It's hugely polarized between the top and the bottom clubs, and gets even worse as you go down the pyramid. So that's something to look at and consider. But I think sort of UEFA's definitely has a role and is sort of here to stay.
I agree. I would be curious to see if the UEFA itself will see some reform in the future. So the UEFA is also not very well liked all over Europe, and there's lots of scandals about corruption and intransparency and just doing stuff to commercialize football more against the will of all the or nearly all the actors in the system. And but in its heart, it's still a federation, and the federation is usually kind of grassroots organized. It's with federation members who are usually, in the terms of UEFA, also federations, but whose acting people are voted into, and it's like with several layers, a voting system, and at some point you can exact influence as the bottom layer to the top layer, but it takes a while. And I'm really curious to see if this will change, and we won't see all the same names running the UEFA or the other organizations. And yeah, curious to see that, but it will take years for any change to happen.
Yeah, we've got this question from Cornell, which actually talks about one of the proposals in the Super League, which maybe actually quite a few people could get behind, which is player salary level. So would you agree that introducing a salary cap like the mechanism in the Australian A-League could decrease the need for larger revenue streams from the top clubs? So he says Barcelona spends something like 70% of their revenue on player salaries. I guess all of that goes to Messi. Yeah, is that something that you think would could be introduced, like the salary cap?
So I think potentially. So UEFA's current financial control mechanism, FFP, UEFA FFP, has got to do with operating losses. So the way it's currently structured is clubs are allowed to make X million, I think it's about 35 million, of cumulative operating losses over 3 seasons. And the model was designed for sustainability rather than competitive balance, which perhaps salary caps leans more towards. But that's what UEFA's current method is. It's obviously going to be tweaked because of COVID and the huge losses across football because of COVID, and they're going to look at things on an average basis across an extended period. But there are opportunities. I think we've seen that in England, for example, where the lower tiers have tried to introduce a salary cap, and it's got voted through and then got overruled by courts, etc. But I know they are actively trying. So yes.
I agree. I mean, after all, we're all MBA students, and what we see here is a system that is quite centrally governed. The UEFA would have the potential to enact rules and to ensure that these are followed up, that could effectively introduce a salary cap. And the financial fair play is an attempt to go at least into a financial fair play direction, but there are way too many workarounds that are tolerated, and in order to introduce something like this, you would need to be really strict and to see that there are no ways to go around it. But I think it would really benefit the entire system, but not the ones who currently make most of the money from the systems. And unfortunately, these are the ones who are in the positions of power.
All right, we'll just have. I wanted to. We've got like 6 minutes left. I want to talk about both of you, how you met your careers, after your MBAs. But we'll just take one last question, and I guess Andreas, since you're in Germany, this question, if you could take this very briefly, very quickly, what needs to be done to introduce this 50+1 model that we hear about in Germany, where fans get a big share in terms of the board level in football clubs?
Yeah, it's. I think it's a good model. It is difficult at some points, and we see that again and again in Germany. But generally, it's a good idea. And think that fans should try to see where they have power over the clubs and over the federations to kind of push this through. It's super difficult to retroactively enact such a model when already all the shares are sold. It would have been much easier at the beginning, but I don't know. Fans should unite. The fan organizations are relatively well connected. So local fans should connect with their fan organizations, which are connected with each other, and then they should talk to the federation. And I think that's the way to push this through, and just to see where you have leverage. Just look what's happening today at Manchester United. So fans clearly understand where they have leverage, and they should just be careful to channel that into the right directions and to coordinate with themselves. And then it might be possible to get this through, or at least a kind of watered down solution that can be increased more and more over time.
All right, great. I wanted to just spend the last couple of minutes talking about both of you, really. So Zal, you told me that you've always wanted to get into the sports business. So can you briefly tell us how you did that, with your MBA?
So I think for me, like you said, I've always sort of really wanted to work in sport, but never quite found the right role. It's an industry that is quite difficult to break into. It's niche. There are not too many roles. Those that do get advertised are extremely competitive. So it's a difficult industry to break into. And like I said, I never really quite found that right role, but I sort of used the MBA almost as an opportunity to try pivot my career. I used to work in healthcare before this. And for me, it was all about sort of building my industry knowledge to be able to demonstrate through any process or any interview process that, look, although I've not worked in sports, my industry knowledge, I'm not talking about knowing scores and following the teams and knowing about players, understanding of how the industry operates and what are the sort of levers for growth and opportunities. I think that's a side I really invested into, which really benefited me while I was going through the process at Deloitte.
And I guess we're at that point in sports where actually people with different from different disciplines or different skill sets now can find an area, a role in sports, right? Because there's analytics, the use of analytics, for example, corporate sponsorships. Though all of this has really exploded in the last couple of years. So I think if anyone's interested to go into sports, maybe didn't have that, wasn't great. You don't have to be an athlete, but there's now quite a lot of roles for you. Andreas, I know you've been a great football fan for a long time, and you've also been an entrepreneur at heart. So how did these two things come together?
Actually, it's more or less coincidental. So the reason why I'm doing what I'm currently doing, so Sponso is a marketplace that connects sports people and clubs with brands, and the other way around. It's not because I'm passionate about sports, it's more because I'm an entrepreneur. I founded business before. I used the opportunity to be in such a great entrepreneurial space like Cambridge to found another business. And just coincidentally, the idea to Sponso was the one out of all the ideas that we had at that point that had the greatest potential. And I mean, obviously, it's also fun to work at something in a sector where you're really passionate about, but the core initiating factor was just that it's a good business opportunity.
Thank you very much. That's all the time we have for today. I want to thank our guests, Andreas and Zal. I also want to thank you, the viewers. You've been a great audience. There's been tons of questions and comments. I hope we went through all of them. I'll be back in 2 weeks, and that episode will be a bit different from this one. I won't have any guests with me, but I'll talk about the CJBS employment report for 2020. So this is for the class that finished in 2020. So till then, thank you very much. Thanks very much to you, Andreas and Zal.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Konrad.
Thanks for having us. And anyone who listened, feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or Twitter and see where we can take this.